Before I go into the details of the Battle of Halbe, the famous Halbe Pocket, and the last major catastrophe before the end of the Second World War at the end of April, I would like to take another walk through the forest cemetery here in Halbe, where countless known and unknown soldiers have been buried. And even today throughout the year, you can still find the remains of people, soldiers, women, and children. Here is the row of unknowns from April 1945. In total, at least 40,000 were killed or died. 30,000 soldiers, an estimated 10,000 civilians. Every now and then, you find a name here. And then there were the rows of unknown soldiers who were buried. In this huge catastrophe for both sides, it wasn't just the Germans who made a great blood sacrifice, but also the Soviet soldiers. It is estimated that 20,000 of them fell in the 4 days at the end of April when the two Russian armies encircled them here, which I will come to later. As far as the eye can see, rows of graves. Further in the foreground are some newly dug graves of German soldiers, civilians, and Soviet soldiers who were found during the last few months and will be buried with the participation of the German armed forces and representatives of Russia. As far as the eye can see, graves 20,000, 22,000. There were also many displaced people, forcibly expelled from East Prussia, from Silesia, Pomerania, who had hoped here in Halbe, together with Wehrmacht units, to still be able to break out as part of the 9th Army. And who were bitterly, bitterly disappointed. Many did not survive. How did the Battle of Halbe, the Halbe Pocket, even come about? Which units were involved? Was there ever a realistic chance of breaking out? Where were the other German units deployed? How far away were they? We have to imagine that all this took place just over a week before the Germans' surrender. This is the dirt road in front of the forest cemetery in the village of Halbe, which had about 2,500 inhabitants in the charming woodland landscape of the Dam Spreewald district in Brandenburg. This is how the path may have appeared in early May 1945, or something similar. There are no pictures of the events in the so-called Halbe Pocket from April 24th to 28th, 1945, including the dramatic breakout, only disturbing reports recorded later by survivors. Apart from the bombing campaign, the Battle of Halbe is the clearest example of the fateful bond between the military and the population when acts of war unite these two groups. For in the forests alongside the remnants of the 9th Army, there were also tens of thousands of women, children, and elderly men over the age of 60 who had fled or been expelled from Eastern Germany and who had not been conscripted into the Volkssturm. In order to establish at least a certain degree of order during this gigantic, almost migratory movement of peoples, the authorities had set up a system in February 1945 to direct the refugees westward. This proved almost impossible, as many refugees were traveling with their livestock, some on horse-drawn carts or on foot with heavily laden handcarts. The evacuation system had allowed them to spend one night in the villages along their way until they had to continue their journey by 10 o'clock the next day. Only those who were ill were allowed to stay. Halbe itself, a small village in the Spreewald, about 60 kilometers south of Berlin, with around 1,250 inhabitants in 1939, hosted about 1,000 refugees per night during these weeks. However, instead of the local Nazi authorities ordering and enforcing the urgently needed evacuation, it was repeatedly delayed, probably out of fear of being accused of defeatism by Berlin and being hanged by a so-called flying court-martial. The result was 500,000 refugees who had no relatives in the West, but now preferred to take their fate into their own hands and wait for further developments in the supposedly safe, remote Spreewald. It all began a week earlier, on the 16th of April, when the Red Army launched its broad offensive towards Berlin with a total of 19 armies from the Kustrin bridgehead with the 1st Belarusian Front under Marshal Georgy Zhukov, and on the Neisse between Forst and Gubin with the 1st Ukrainian Front under Marshal Ivan Stepanovich Konev da Anin. In this largest battle of the Second World War on German soil, the numerically and materially superior Soviet units managed to make ever deeper breakthroughs, despite the fierce resistance of the depleted regular German divisions, until, on April 19th, the resistance on the Silo Heights finally collapsed. I will recount the further events leading up to the futile defense of Berlin in a video about the final battle for Berlin at the appropriate time. On the 19th of April 1945, Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front broke through the German defensive line about 70 kilometers east of Berlin, after which the already severely depleted Wehrmacht units retreated, some in disorder. Here stood the Ninth Army, tasked with defending the Oder Line, and General of the Infantry Theodor Busse, with 190,000 soldiers in 15 divisions, including 512 tanks, 2,625 artillery pieces, 300 aircraft, and 300 to 400 anti-aircraft guns. Here on the 3rd of March, 1945, General Busse, standing to the right of Hitler at the last front meeting at Harnikop Castle in the Märkisch-Oderland district of Brandenburg. At this time, the Ninth Army consisted of the 101st Army Corps, formed only in February under Lieutenant General Friedrich Sixt, the 5th SS Volunteer Mountain Corps under SS Obergruppenführer and General of the Waffen-SS Friedrich Jeckeln, as well as the 11th SS Panzer Corps, which was formed on February 1st, 1945, from the remnants of the 5th Army Corps that had been destroyed at Sevastopol in May 1944. What was remarkable about this supposed SS Corps was that it was actually an army unit, and its designation was based solely on its commander, Obergruppenführer, and General of the Waffen-SS, Matthias Klein-Heisterkamp, who died on the 2nd of May in the Halbe pocket after being seriously wounded, or, according to other sources, by suicide. However, since the Ninth Army posed a significant threat to the Soviet advance, it was to be isolated first and then destroyed. When it was forced to abandon its positions after costly and grueling attacks by the Red Army, large parts of the army had retreated southwest towards Halbe and Märkisch-Buchholz, but precisely between the edges of the 1st Belarusian Front and the 1st Ukrainian Front, whose shock troops had already advanced to the suburbs of Berlin. The number of refugees had also increased significantly after the collapse of the Ninth Army. Estimates go up to 150,000 who were now following in the wake of the general retreat from the area of Fürstenwalde, Frankfurt, and Cottbus. This created an area of about 1,200 square kilometers, known as a wandering pocket, which had been increasingly compressed until April 25th, when the two Soviet pincers encircled the Ninth Army in a pocket about 24 kilometers wide and 13 kilometers deep in the Spreewald, south of the village of Halbe. From this point on, the total of between 150,000 and 200,000 people, whether in uniform or civilian clothes, were cut off from the outside, with no support in sight. For the Ninth Army, there were now two options. Either accept the Red Army's offer of surrender or break through to the west to join the 12th Army, which was holding a position 60 kilometers southwest of Berlin, stretching from Furch in the north to Niemek in the south. After reunification, according to the plans, these two armies would have been armies in name only, defending Berlin against the Red Army, which had been victorious for months. Or Plan B, to try together to reach the American-occupied west bank of the Elbe and surrender there. The 12th Army, led by General of the Armored Troops Walter Wenck, had only been formed and reinforced in its current composition on April 10th from Army Group E, with hastily trained very young soldiers, and was also poorly armed. Without jumping ahead, the ordered relief attack by the 12th Army to defend Berlin did not take place, because General Wenck did not carry out the order given to him in 1943 by General Guderian, who had been sent to him personally by the Chief of the High Command of the Armed Forces, Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, because, in view of the desperate military situation, he was more concerned with the fate of the Ninth Army to the east than with that of Berlin. As we heard, the two Soviet fronts, with a total of 45 infantry divisions and 3 cavalry divisions, 13 tanks and mechanized brigades with about 700 tanks, an artillery division with 300 guns and rocket launchers, the remnants of the Ninth Army, and tens of thousands of civilians in a small wooded area between Märkisch, Buchholz, and Halbe. It was a hodgepodge of 11 German infantry divisions, 2 motorized divisions, 1 tank division, and numerous scattered units and formations, which I tried to assemble to the best of my knowledge. However, the sources sometimes contradict each other on this. The already mentioned 11th SS Panzer Corps under SS Obergruppenführer Matthias Klein-Heisterkamp, remnants of the 712th Infantry Division, which had already been heavily decimated in the Battle of the Seelow Heights, and then destroyed during the Breakout, under Major General Joachim von Segroth, who has been missing near Halbe since May 2nd, and Schlawikau, the Panzer Grenadier Division Kormark, under Major General Willy Langkite, here in the uniform of the armored troops. The Heavy SS Panzer Division 502 under SS Sturmbannführer, or Obersturmbannführer Kurt Hartranft. Remnants of the 303rd Infantry Division, also known as Infantry Division Doberitz, under Colonel Walter Scheunemann. Remnants of the 169th Infantry Division under Lieutenant General Georg Radzi, the 5th SS Mountain Corps under SS Obergruppenführer Friedrich Jeckeln, who was captured in Halbe and later executed after the war crimes trial held in Riga from January 26 to February 3, 1946. The 32nd SS Volunteer Grenadier Division, 31st January, under SS Standartenführer Hans Kempin. The staff of the 391st Security Division, under Major General Rudolf Sickenius. On the 29th of April, 1945, Sickenius was seriously wounded during an escape attempt near Teupitz, and subsequently committed suicide. The Regner Combat Group and Lieutenant General Adolf Regner, including the Alarm, police units, and Volkssturm battalions, as well as remnants of the Regner Infantry Division, the 433rd and 463rd Infantry Divisions, and remnants of the 286th Infantry Division, which had been crushed in East Prussia at the beginning of April, and was now the 286th Training Division, under the command of Major General M.A. von Roden, who was shot on the 3rd of May 1945 while attempting to escape from a Soviet prison camp near the front. The 5th Army Corps, under General of the Eagle, Kurt Weger, with remnants of the 342nd Infantry Division, which had been half destroyed, under Lieutenant General Heinrich Nickel, and the 275th Infantry Division, also destroyed, under Lieutenant General Hans Schmidt. The 35th SS and Police Grenadier Division, under SS Standartenführer Rüdiger Pipkorn, who was killed near Halbe on April 25, 1945. A battle group of the 36th SS Waffen-Grenadier Division, an SS Brigade Führer, and Major General of the Waffen-SS, Fritz Schmedes. Larger parts of the 21st Panzer Division, under Lieutenant General Werner Marx, parts of the 10th SS Panzer Division, Frundsberg, led by the commander of the SS Tank Destroyer Assault Gun Battalion 10, SS Lieutenant Colonel of the Reserve Franz Rostel, and remnants of the 1st Battalion of the Brandenburg Tank Regiment. The 23rd SS Volunteer Panzer Grenadier Division Nederland, which was almost destroyed in the pocket, under SS Brigade Führer and Major General of the Waffen-SS Jürgen Wagner, who was executed in Yugoslavia in 1947, as well as the also destroyed SS Rocket Launcher Battalion 505 under Sturmbannführer Dr. Hans-Peter Kudris. In addition, there were a considerable number of members of the Reich Labor Service, the Kriegsmarine, and the Luftwaffe, as well as the organization Todt. In the meantime, however, living conditions within the semi-enclosed area, which by then was only about 80 square kilometers in size, had deteriorated by the hour. Cut off by the dense Soviet cordon, supplies of food, including drinking water, soon collapsed, followed on the 21st of April by the supply of ammunition and medical supplies. Meanwhile, the narrow forest roads were also blocked by endless columns of Wehrmacht and civilian vehicles, which were repeatedly attacked and destroyed by Soviet fighter planes. This was accompanied by continuous heavy artillery fire, which caused unprecedented losses among the people and horses. Under constant pressure from the Soviet forces, soldiers and refugees were forced into increasingly cramped conditions where many realized that a happy outcome was no longer likely. While the makeshift field hospitals were overcrowded with wounded and the air was filled with the breath of death and destruction, discipline also began to falter. There was looting and desertion. In order to save as many people as possible, under normal circumstances, the offered surrender would have been inevitable. However, General Busse did not accept this, as he too was well aware of the consequences of captivity after 4 years of a merciless war on both sides. When General Busse realized, after the first failed breakout attempts starting on April 24th, that the pocket could no longer hold out, he ordered his troops to regroup west of Halbe. Because by April 25th, as I have already mentioned, the 12th Army under General Wenck had disobeyed Hitler's order to relieve the embattled and encircled Berlin, and had instead turned toward the beleaguered 9th Army. Also under his command was the Friedrich Ludwig Jahn Infantry Division, which was mainly made up of members of the Reich Labor Service and commanded by Colonel Franz Weller. One of their young soldiers was the later prominent and popular ZDF sports presenter Wim Tölke, who, as he told me himself 30 years ago, was serving as a radio operator in a Kübelwagen at the time. when they drove over a mine and he was seriously wounded, which later explained his somewhat lanky gait. After 2 more breakout attempts failed in the fire of the Red Army during the night of April the 27th and the following day, all preparations were now underway on the orders of General Busse for the major breakthrough toward the spearheads of the 12th Army, advancing from the area south of Potsdam. Halbe, conveniently located for its road connections, was at the center of the violent breakthrough, also known by the Lancers as the Eye of the Needle. Then, hoping to break through the Soviet lines via Kummersdorf toward Baylitz, the breakout supported by artillery and mortars began on the night of April 28th to 29th. In the north, led by the Kurmark Tank Division, comprising only 4,350 men, and Major General Willy Langkeit, who after the war became Brigadier General of the Federal Border Guard. In the south, by parts of the Heavy SS Tank Battalion 502, which was equipped with Tiger II, King Tiger tanks. But then, one feels transported back to the time of the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, 9 AD. The breakout turned into a chaotic, brutal exchange of blows in a very confined space. This was due to the narrow forest paths, the density of the Red Army formations, the marshy terrain of the Spreewald, and the visibility limited to only a few meters by the dense tree population, compounded by the darkness. The main scenes of action were the railway embankment and the cemetery, where Soviet and Wehrmacht soldiers fought bitter close combat between the gravestones, while their tanks and armored personnel carriers fired at each other at close range. Hiding behind the high embankment of the Berlin-Görlitz railway line, which ran halfway through the town, large numbers of Soviet soldiers now opened fire on the German soldiers advancing in the darkness, inflicting heavy losses. While the battle raged mercilessly on both sides, thousands of frightened refugees wandered aimlessly along forest paths and roads, often getting caught in the crossfire. Today, the number of civilian casualties is estimated to be at least 10,000. However, it could have been twice as many who were killed by artillery fire, machine gun fire, or even deliberately by Soviet soldiers. Due to the uncertain fate after the Red Army's victory, many officers, soldiers, and civilians committed suicide with their families. The scene of the fighting presented an apocalyptic picture. Kilometers upon kilometers of destroyed or burnt-out tanks and trucks lay scattered across the landscape. Then, after days of indescribably bloody fighting to break through the 2 or even 3 Soviet encirclement cordon lines, on the 1st of May, after 60 kilometers near Baylitz, between 25 and 30,000 completely exhausted German soldiers and 5,000 traumatized civilians reached the front line of the 12th Army. Many had lost everything, their comrades or their families. According to Soviet figures, around 20,000 of their soldiers were supposed to have been killed, and they themselves claimed to have killed 60,000 German soldiers and taken around 120,000 prisoners. German estimates, however, assumed that at least 30,000, more likely 40,000 German soldiers were killed, another 20,000 wounded, and 60,000 taken prisoner. As for the fate of the virtually annihilated 9th Army, its remnants had joined Weng's 12th Army south of Baylitz. In the chaos of the final days of the war, they formed a corridor about 100 kilometers long to the west, through which soldiers and refugees streamed to the Elbe Bridge at Tangermunde to avoid being taken prisoner by the Soviets. Between May 4th and 7th, 1945, thousands were able to cross the Elbe using the footpath of the partially destroyed bridge, where they surrendered on the other side of the river to elements of the 102nd United States Infantry Division and the 9th United States Army. This led to unsightly scenes of British soldiers mistreating their defeated enemies. Despite the scale of the tragedy, the Battle of Halbe was overshadowed for many years by the more prominent fall of Berlin and did not receive much attention. Contributing to this was the chaos of the final days, combined with the Soviet capture of Central and Eastern Germany, after which many records of the battle were lost, hidden in archives, or simply destroyed. As for the handling of the German victims of Halbe, who were at first, if at all, only hastily buried, and in this regard, the early German Democratic Republic did not exactly cover itself in glory, the fallen and deceased only received proper recognition for the first time thanks to the significant efforts of the Protestant pastor Ernst Teichmann, who was transferred to Halbe in 1947 and established the Forest Cemetery. Meanwhile, more than 28,000 war victims are now buried in Germany's largest military cemetery, although most of them remain unidentified. For many years, active and retired soldiers of the German armed forces have been taking exemplary care of the gravestones and the cemetery, as shown here by members of a reservist association from Schleswig-Holstein. So, if you are ever south of Berlin, you should visit the Halbe Forest Cemetery.